Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on Call of Duty Advanced Warfare's multiplayer as of the Steam Free Weekend that is currently happening as I'm recording this on May 1st, 2015. So if you're watching this later on, then there's probably not a free weekend going on at your time, but there is one right now, and I figured that you might be interested in what I have to say on it. Because, let's face it, there's a lot of bandwidth to go through to actually download the multiplayer component of this thing. It is about 50 gigabytes. I think it's actually closer to 45, but it's a ridiculous amount of space for just the multiplayer. And this is all about the competitive multiplayer. I haven't tried zombies or anything like that because I just don't like zombies. So what you have here is pretty much just a first impressions thing. I've gone up to about rank 26, 27, something like that. And so don't take this as kind of a full-on review situation. I do plan on reviewing the full game at some point in the future, but that won't happen until I can get it for pretty cheap and most likely a physical copy because the digital prices never go down for Activision and they're ridiculously stingy on that. I mean, Call of Duty 4 is still $10 on sale. That's just ridiculous. It should be about 5 or less. But anyway, Advanced Warfare is currently the latest game. We have Black Ops 3 on the way, and Advanced Warfare itself got a fairly mixed reception when it came out. It had a lot of bugs in it, and most people seemed to forget about it after a while, went back to Black Ops 2 or previous Call of Duty games. And I was just kind of curious as how it played, because let's face it, this thing is very different from your normal Call of Duty. There is a classic playlist you can jump into, and that's pretty much what you'd expect from Call of Duty, just running around on the ground, no exosuit abilities or anything like that. But good luck finding anybody playing that, because the most players I've found was about 7 games worth of people in Team Deathmatch. The only other one I could find players in was Mosh Pit, and that was only 2 games, and the one I was in wasn't even full. And with those TDM games, the ones I was in mostly weren't full either. So you can already see a pretty big reason as to why I would wait for this thing to get really cheap, because let's face it, I'm not going to get much out of the multiplayer when I do finally get it for cheap. So I figure I can go ahead and get as much out of the multiplayer right now as I can, and then later on I can do a full review and kind of reference this video a bit. So now that all that preface is out of the way, the actual game itself is not particularly impressive in terms of its visuals. It has a decent art style going for it where everything's very futuristic. It's set in the 2050s, and so of course it's going to be more advanced technology than what we have right now. You've got exosuits, you've got these weapons that are definitely futuristic, like directed energy weapons, you've got a lot of caseless kind of stuff going on, rail guns, all sorts of things like that. So the art style works pretty well for it, even though the visual quality is about average for the current times. It's not particularly impressive by any stretch of the imagination, and it certainly doesn't look next-gen. So take that for what it's worth. As far as the sound design goes, I haven't really gotten a chance to hear much music in it, but it's decent. It's nothing particularly memorable, though. And the voice acting is, like most Call of Duty games, pretty decent. I mean, the only voice acting I'm hearing is, of course, the battle chatter, but it's all pretty well done and it works very well for the game. And the sound effects are a bit all over the place, actually. Some of the weapons sound really beefy and powerful, like the railguns, for example, but the 45, the big pistol you get, just sounds incredibly wimpy, for example. And there's a lot of weapons like that where they just sound incredibly wimpy. So the sound design itself is just kind of all over the place, and you don't really get a lot of consistency with the sound effects, but everything else is just kind of average to good. And then we come to the gameplay itself, because again, this is about the multiplayer, and it's both very familiar and very different. The familiar bits come in when you're moving around on the ground. It definitely feels like Call of Duty, and when you are shooting things, it feels like Call of Duty, because the gunplay is pretty much exactly the same as it's always been. Most of the weapons don't have a lot of recoil, so they're very easy to control, and you can add attachments that will make it easier to aim and shoot. So this isn't really a very big skill-based game in terms of its gunplay, but it is more skill-based in terms of its movement, because now you have the exosuits. And what this allows you to do is to dodge. You can do a double tap in a direction, left or right, and you will actually do a quick jump to that direction. Or you can do a double jump and the second jump actually propels you pretty high. Or you can actually do a double jump and then rocket forward, backward, whatever, with the dodging maneuvers. And it creates a pretty interesting dynamic where there's a lot of verticality to the game. But at the same time, it also means that the maps don't really flow all that well. In older Call of Duty games, you could really get a feel for how the maps were designed to have a certain flow to them. For example, in Call of Duty 4, the maps had very definite choke points, they had very definite counter points that you could go to, and it all made sense. In this, not so much. It's just kind of a giant cluster of various structures that allow you to jump up and then get mowed down from every direction, or to be on the ground and get mowed down from every direction, and things like that. So there's not really a huge amount of flow to these maps, and the way they've designed the exosuits, it doesn't really work too well in the game's favor, but it does certainly shake things up and add some new dimensions to how you can actually move around and such. So that does change up the amount of skill required to actually maneuver properly. It feels a lot more like Unreal Tournament, actually, where you could actually do quick dodges left, right, and so on and so forth in Unreal Tournament games. But in this one, it's a bit faster and more pronounced than you're used to with those, where it's just kind of a very, very quick jump because you're being basically propelled by a rocket pack. So it takes some getting used to. It doesn't feel quite as useful as Unreal Tournament's sort of dodging, but it's certainly nice to have it. And occasionally it does get you out of some jams, but unfortunately, because the time to kill in this game is so low, you don't really get a huge amount of use out of it, and you certainly don't get a lot of use out of your exo abilities. At least I didn't. I rarely use the thing. I mean, you get a shield as your default to begin with, and there's also things like increasing your speed, which I almost never use. So there's not really a huge amount of positive things with the exosuits other than just kind of shaking the thing up a bit, making it a bit different from what you're used to, and making the gameplay kind of a mess, actually. All I could really find in this thing was Team Deathmatch, and then I got one thing of Mosh Pit in before pretty much everybody jumped out of the playlist. So I basically got Domination and Kill Confirmed as well. And this game is really not at all conducive to objective modes whatsoever. It is really only conducive to Team Deathmatch, and that's why most people play Team Deathmatch. Now, you had that with earlier Call of Duty games as well, but it's not quite as pronounced as this, where the game just doesn't work in terms of objective modes. It's not fun to play if you're playing objective modes. And so when you're actually running around on the ground, you find that it's just not enjoyable to have to sit around and wait for things to happen. For example, if you're doing Domination, you have to sit around an objective and wait. But you can't really do that because the movement is so much faster in this game than you're used to in a Call of Duty game that you just get mowed down incredibly quickly because there's basically no cover when you're going to these objective points. So when you're actually trying to stay in cover, there's still tons of points where the enemy can actually get at you. So there's no reason to really play in objective mode when all you're going to do is die really fast, and there's not really going to be much fun for it. Instead, people play Team Deathmatch, which still isn't all that great. I mean, I ran into a couple of aimbotters, but I mean, that's to be expected when it's a peer-to-peer and matchmaking kind of game. Yep, peer-to-peer and matchmaking. Yes, it does result in lag problems. Yes, it does result in some spotty hit detection at times. It's not quite as bad as people will have you believe, though. A lot of people will act like it's just absolutely atrocious, but clearly they have never played Battlefield 3 and 4 before. So, obviously, there's some weirdness going on. A lot of people like to go into hyperbole on this thing. And so when I'm saying that the objective modes aren't fun, I'm not saying that, oh, the game is horrible. I'm saying that it loses steam quickly. And while it can be fun for a quick match or two, you're not really going to have a huge lasting impression with this thing, because it is very familiar in terms of a lot of its mechanics. It's still Call of Duty, that's for sure. It still has the same gunplay that it always has. It still has the create a class system, where you pretty much do the pick 10 system, only it's pick 13 this time around. And so you still have perks, you still have score streaks, you still have a variety of weapons with attachments that you have to unlock. You still have rank-based unlocks, which I wish they would just do away with that entirely. Go back to the Black Ops 1 system, where you had those points that you could buy things with. Only this time around, don't lock it behind ranks. They just need to do that. I'm tired of rank-based unlocks. It's just annoying to have these people who've played longer get access to the better stuff. Now, you don't really get that as much with this one, because a lot of the starting gear is just really good, so at least there's that. But it's just kind of annoying when you have certain weapons that you might really like the railgun pistol, for example. I actually really like that thing, even though I'm terrible with it, apparently. But you don't unlock that until quite a bit into the progression, so if you want to use that, you're kind of screwed, because the only pistol you got access to until then is the Atlas 45, which is complete garbage. So there's just this kind of weird balancing thing going on, where it's not atrocious, but there's a few weapons that are just blatantly better than some of the others. And that's pretty much the same as it's always been with Call of Duty, but in this one it feels more pronounced because the movement is faster, because the spawns are so terrible, because the maps are so much more cramped than usual, and because it's just so quick to die in this thing. And so you'll see a lot of people who are just really terrible at the game complaining about that, and instead of saying, oh, well, I'm just terrible at the game, they actually go, oh, this game sucks. And that's all I heard when I was playing, people just complaining about the game. It's not atrocious by any stretch of the imagination. It's okay. It's just something you hop into for a round or two, and then you're done for a while. You go back to it if you have, a few minutes to kill. That's the kind of game this is. It's not the kind of game you jump into and play for hours and hours and hours on end, unless you're like me and you're doing it for reviewing purposes. So I guess that's what you need to take away from this. It's more Call of Duty. It's slightly different than usual. It's worth checking out. I'd say maybe 15, 20 bucks at most. Certainly not 60 bucks. Do not pay 60 bucks for this thing. Do not pay full price. It is definitely not worth that. But if you get it on sale, feel free. Or if you're playing it on console and you get it used, feel free, because it's still pretty decent, and obviously there's the single player campaign, the zombies mode, if you are into that sort of thing. So there is some replay value there, and it might keep you going until the next game comes along that just tickles your fancy or whatever. They did add some kind of cool stuff with the customization. I mean, that's basically from Call of Duty Ghosts, but I haven't played that yet, so I can't really speak too much on that and how it's different from that or what. But it does add some operator customization where you can change how your player character looks and what they're wearing, what their exosuit looks like, all that sort of thing. Change their gender, of course. And so that's pretty cool. And I like that they're adding more and more customization into the game. I don't like the camos they added for the guns, though. Those look terrible in this game. And I feel like this thing would be so much better if it were on dedicated servers instead of the peer-to-peer system, because that lag can be very problematic. You do get some hit detection issues sometimes. But other than that, it's not a bad game. A lot of people are acting like it is, but it's not. It's just not amazing either. And it is certainly full of things that don't necessarily work out in the game's favor, like the elite, professional, enlisted, whatever gear that you get in supply drops, which is basically just the battle pack kind of thing, only you just get it by playing the game normally. And it includes some different customization options for your character, as well as sometimes you get unique weapons that are just variants on what you have already. So, for example, you might get an assault rifle like I did, where it automatically comes with dual mags attachment, where that just means you get a faster reload, and the handling is a bit different, or the range is higher but the damage is lower, and things like that. And they certainly look different as well. and you can still customize them as you wish. Some of them have permanent attachments, but that's kind of it. It's more of a gimmick than anything else. It doesn't really affect the gameplay all that much, but it is kind of nice to have some extra uniqueness to some of the weapons. But ultimately, it's just more Call of Duty. If you like Call of Duty, you'll probably be able to get at least something out of it. But again, don't go into this thing expecting to play it for hours and hours and hours on end. Play it for a match or two at a time. It's pretty enjoyable for that. I mean, it's not amazing, but it can be fun sometimes. And I figure if Treyarch took what happened with this particular game in mind and fixes a lot of the problems that it has with their upcoming Black Ops 3, that Black Ops 3 could actually be very, very good. We'll have to see, though. And with that, I will catch you guys in later videos. Thanks for watching.